Elias, just gotta make it 4 blocks, I muttered to myself as we stepped out of the building. How hard could that be? The soldier I was with gave me a look of anger. You better keep that mouth shut if you don't want to jinx us. Now listen to me, stay low and stay close. If I say run, you run. If I say hide, you hide. You got that? I nodded as another explosion rocked the ship. How the hell we were going to get out of this one was far beyond me, but that didn't stop me from wanting to get the hell out of this war zone and into somewhere marginally safer. We couldn't do that yet, though. We still had an APC to steal. I followed the soldier as close as I could, and I saw him start to grip the stock of his rifle with more intensity until I heard the material creak. Or at least it would have if this wasn't an active war zone. As I followed him, I couldn't help but think about what my family would think of my situation, if they're all right and not a... I wouldn't let myself think any further than that. They had to be all right. They had to be safe. I was knocked out of my whirlwind of thoughts as I heard an explosion come from behind us. I turned to look as the apartment building that we were just in started to crumble and topple over like a wooden tower with the supporting block taken away. For a moment, I just stood there, taking it all in. The home that I had bought with my wife started raising 2 children in, gone in an instant. I felt a tug on my arm as the soldier I was with started pulling me along. We don't have time for you to mourn the loss of a fucking building, you dumbass. Let's move. I jogged quickly after him, and not a moment too soon, as one of the Yaleans started to rummage through the rubble, presumably in search of us. We rushed into an alleyway just as we heard the clicking and hissing noise that I had come to fear, since those Xenos made beachheads on the ship. The soldier waited for the chittering to die down, before poking his head out of the alleyway and motioned for me to follow him. Under any normal circumstances, this place would be impossible to hide in. The streets were clean and not very crowded, and the security in this hab zone was top-notch. Not anymore. I looked at the collection of partially destroyed buildings and piles of rubble that now permeated the once prosperous hab zone. Through the gaps in the buildings, I could see Yaleans and Terran mechs duking it out, some of them even in hand-to-hand combat as they furiously fought for territory. It was all too easy to hide in the rubble, especially when the Xenos barely bothered to look anywhere other than the mechs that hounded them on every turn. Before long, we had traversed 3.5 blocks and ducked into a partially destroyed coffee shop and saw as there were a group of 4 Yaleans all standing around the APC looking at it. Speaking of the APC, with the shape that it was in, it looked more like a half-track from the Second World War than a modern-day APC. It was hard to focus on anything else, as the loud chittering of the Yaleans standing there kept distracting me. What are they saying? I asked. The soldier gave me a look. The fuck do you mean? What are they saying? Don't you have an implant? I shook my head. I could never get one for medical reasons. The soldier just looked at me before fishing into a pouch on his vest and pulled out a small earpiece and motioned for me to put it in. I took it, put it into my ear, and cringed slightly from the slight feedback loop from it going through the boot-up process. And then I heard it. In my right ear, in plain English, was the words that the Yaleans were saying. It was a bit daunting, however, as it still sounded like angry clicking and chittering in my left. Why this bit of Terran tech is so important to command is completely beyond me. I mean, what can they even teach us that we don't already know? One asked. Their armor plating is some of the best in the galaxy. Sure, we got some when that Terran merchant vessel was raided, but that wasn't even military grade. Any armor that we can find out here is vital to replicate it, another explained, nudging it with one of their many legs. Even if it's completely destroyed. Shit, whispered the soldier. That's our fucking ride that they're stealing right there. I'll see if I can't get a distraction going. You keep an eye on them. I nodded and continued to listen in to the conversation as the soldier frantically whispered into the mic, desperate to not have to walk the rest of the way back to our lines. Suddenly, an explosion rang out from a block or 2 away, followed by an ancient Terran song being blasted from the emergency PA system for the block. All the aliens looked in that direction. Some even raised their weapons and pointed them down the street. What in the name of the ancestors was that? One of them asked, still clutching their plasma gun. Maybe it's those Terrans trying to lure us into a trap, suggested another. We still have to check it out, said the one that must be in charge. Skiv, check it out. The one that I assumed was Skiv said something that didn't translate as they moved carefully away from the APC and down the street. There was another explosion as Skiv's head turned from a head to a piñata of gore. I looked up to try and find the shooter, only hearing the ancient Terran song. The aliens looked around in fear, trying desperately to find the shooter, as another head exploded. Then another, and another, until it was finally over. With no more aliens in sight, the song quickly shut off, and was replaced with the sound of a gruff-sounding man.
"Get the hell out of here before more come!"
Not wanting to waste any time, I jumped up from my hiding spot and ran to the APC with the soldier following quickly behind me. "I hope you know how to drive this thing," I said over my shoulder as I inspected more closely the damage to the armor. It was torn to shreds, and the entire roof of the thing was completely gone, likely destroyed by whatever explosion caused it to be abandoned in the first place. "Bitch, please. They don't even let you out of basic if you can't fucking drive. Get in and we'll get you back to your family," he said as he climbed into the cab. I could hear him mutter a few more choice words about me and my intelligence, but I paid them no mind as I climbed into the passenger seat. The inside of it looked no better than the outside did, with spent ammo casings littered everywhere and still drying blood that had collected in the footrest on my side. Fighting the urge not to throw up, I looked into the back of the vehicle and saw a group of Yalayans making their way straight towards us. "Hey," I said as I started rapidly tapping his shoulder. "Get us the fuck out of here! Get us the fuck out of here!" I shouted over the giant bug uttering its surprise in one of my ears, while in the other I heard the chittering noise of untranslated gibberish. The APC finally started, just as the aliens raised their rifles, and I heard the all-too-familiar whine of rifles charging to shoot. We shot forward, and I was pressed into my seat just as a small crater appeared where we were just a moment ago. "Holy shit, holy shit!" I shouted as those overgrown bugs continued to take pot shots at us while running after us. "Yeah, I can fucking see them, thanks, Einstein," shouted the soldier as he swerved to narrowly avoid some of the rubble crowding the street. Then, in a voice that was closer to a regular speaking voice, "Sergeant, be advised, transport has been secured, making our way to you." He risked a glance behind us at the charging aliens that were keeping pace with us. 5+-foot mobiles in pursuit." He looked back over to me. "They're going to keep making pot shots at us until we either get to the line or get blasted into paste. See if there's a launcher somewhere in there we can make use of." "What?" I shouted, desperate to be heard over the whine of the engine and the zap of plasma all around us. "Find a launcher and return fire. The fuck do you think I'm speaking Chinese?" He shouted as he swerved again. Okay, I said as I clutched the back of my seat and shakily stood up. It was funny. The shaking and overall lack of control reminded me a lot of my time growing up on Mars. We would always find excuses to get out of the city we lived in and riding along the deserts of Mars on the buggies that we would steal from the neighbors. But back then, there wasn't the threat of aliens the size of buildings chasing you hell-bent on killing you. I shakily made my way back to the troop transport portion of the vehicle and searched in a panicked state for any kind of weapon that we could use to dissuade our attackers. I hazarded a glance up at the attackers and saw that they were actually making ground. "Can this thing go any faster?" I shouted at the soldier who looked like he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. The armor of this thing wasn't the only thing that was shot to hell when it was abandoned. "Find a launcher or something," he shouted as he tried to get the APC to shift into another gear, only to hear the horrible grinding sound of metal on metal. I returned my gaze back to where the weapons should be stored, but couldn't find anything, not even a handgun to try and defend myself with. Hope started to fade as the whine of the engine slowly got louder and louder. Before my hearing was completely subsumed by the sound of engine problems, I heard a clanging sound of metal on metal that drew my eyes over to one of the seats I was clutching onto for dear life. Ducking down a bit, I saw the one thing that might save our lives. I reached down and pulled out the launcher and hefted it onto my shoulder. It reminded me of the time I had to move a fridge with how heavy it was. "I found one!" I shouted. It seemed to be beaten to hell and back, but what I assumed was the indicator said it was loaded, so that was good enough for me. "That's good! Do you know how to use it?" the soldier asked. "I've never held a gun, much less used one," I answered. "What goddamn self-respecting Terran do you think you are if you can't handle a fucking gun?" "We never needed one on Mars. It's not like Terra was," I hastily shouted, as the soldier started swearing more than I thought possible by one man. "Damn it! Fine! Take the wheel, and if you crash and kill us, then find you in the goddamn afterlife," he shouted as he started to stand up. I dropped the launcher on the ground as I dived for the wheel of the APC, desperately trying to prevent us from crashing. The soldier hefted the shoulder-mounted launcher and shouted, "Keep her steady! We only have one shot and I'd rather not fuck this up!" I swallowed and focused my eyes on the road that was scarred and broken from the fighting, trying desperately not to crash. I hadn't been behind the wheel of a vehicle, not since moving on to the strength through diplomacy over 3 years ago, but I still remembered how to do it. I heard an ear-shattering explosion behind me, and I couldn't help but look behind me as I saw the rocket, almost in slow motion, make its way to the center mass of one of the Yaleans and exploding there, causing the kaiju to fall and collect its green blood on the street. I let out a rebel yell seeing one of our foes dying there, but that didn't mean I didn't see the other 4 falter a bit at the corpse now at their feet. It didn't take them long to get over the loss of their comrade, though, because soon after they continued their chase after a moment of hesitation. "How many blocks?" I shouted, desperate to be heard over the engine that I'm sure was 3 seconds away from catching fire. "2 blocks. Keep it together, man, you're almost out of this," he shouted back. I wasn't sure if that was for me or for himself.
Sergeant Grace. ETA 1 minute, Sarge, and get those bolters ready, because we had a one-use launcher and 4 hostiles coming in fast, came the call over the radio. Copy that, soldier, we've got you on cams, I replied. True to my word, I saw the APC speeding past cameras with some really pissed-off-looking aliens following them. I pointed down the street that they would be coming from. "Collins! Get a welcoming party arranged down this street." "You got it, Sarge," came the reply, as the gunner shifted the LMG-like gun from its old position in front of a pile of bodies into one where it covered the new angle of attack for the Yaleans coming in. I posted up at the corner of one of the buildings. All in the nick of time, too, as we heard the sound of an engine screaming bloody murder at the top of its non-existent lungs, along with the telltale sound of plasma being fired. It was only a second longer when I saw that same APC that was beaten to hell and back, with one terrified-looking civvy at the wheel for whatever reason. But we didn't have time to focus on that, because 4 Yaleans shifted into view, their kaleidoscope eyes focused on the APC, until it noticed Collins behind the trigger of the LMG that started tearing into them. Their ranks became more and more disorganized as they took casualties, until only one remained and jumped into an adjoining street. That was my cue to swing into that street and put one in between those freaky bug-like eyes these damn Xenos have. The APC came to a halt and out-collapsed the whole reason this endeavor was taken. One, Elias Varela. He expelled the contents of his stomach onto the street, and after a few moments of catching his breath, he finally looked up to me and Collins. "Thanks for that back there," he said. "Don't thank us yet. We still have a battle to win here," said Collins without skipping a beat. I nodded. "As much as we can all hear the ice in the glass, we still have a fight to win." I pointed at the soldier. "Get yourself some actual transport, and then get this man to the evac point." The soldier saluted and waved the civvy over to follow him. The ship shuddered, reminding me that there was still a war to fight, and we don't have the luxury to lose.
Admiral Elin Chaplin. What's the status on the strength through diplomacy? "We just lost signal with her last escort admiral," replied a communications officer. "And what's our ETA?" "We're 1 minute out," said a navigations officer. "Good." I flicked on open communications to the entire fleet. "Attention, everyone. We will be arriving in the battle around the strength through diplomacy in 1 minute. The Yaleans seem to think that we will just roll over at the first sign of trouble, but we will make them know what it means to provoke United Terra and her people.